Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. So in today's episode, I'm going to be talking about 9 houseplants that you can put in full sun. So I've done a recent video on which plants can tolerate low light conditions. I'll put a link to that in the description. But this episode is kind of the opposite to that. I'll be sharing with you some plants that you can put in a south facing position, so it gets lots of direct sunlight. So hopefully a useful guide if you're confused about which plants you can put in full sun. So the first plant on my list is this guy. This is the Hoya Lisa. This is fast becoming one of my favourite houseplants. This is a recent purchase of mine. You'll notice on this plant that some of the leaves, such as that one, has gone pink, it's turning pink. This is to do with when it's put in a direct sun position, slightly stressing out the leaves, and it's quite capable of tolerating full sun. It just means that some of these leaves will start to go on the pinkish side, and that's quite a nice look for this plant. This plant will also put out lots of small white flowers during the summer months as long as you give it enough light. Putting it in a position where it gets a few hours of direct sunlight should be fine, and it will definitely produce those white flowers during the growing season. This is a vining plant and it naturally grows in northern Australia, tropical environments, so it does like a good amount of sun. So I have this on my east facing windowsill, so it gets probably 4 to 6 hours of direct sunlight during the morning, and it's responding quite well. It's pushing out these pink leaves. So the second plant on my list is this guy here. This is a Ficus lyrata, or a Fiddle Leaf Fig as it's otherwise known. This is another recent purchase of mine. I bought this in a local supermarket. I think it was about £5 for that plant and the pot, so good value. So like I say, this is part of the Ficus family, and as with all ficuses really, they like a bright spot in the home, and they can pretty much all tolerate a few hours of direct sun. So this guy will tolerate being put near a south facing window where it gets a few hours of direct sun, no problem. It will push out growth really quickly in that environment. If you keep it in a darker location, it's not really an issue for ficus plants. They can tolerate that. It just means that the growth will be a lot slower than if you put it in a south-facing position. So this is obviously a baby fiddle leaf fig. So I'll just locate this next to my east-facing window, so it gets about 6 hours of direct sun every morning, and it seems to be responding well. It's recently putting out this new growth here that since I brought it back from the shop. So very happy in high light conditions. The third plant on my list is the Echeveria. So I've got 2 here. I've got this one here, which is starting to put out its flowers, really nice yellow flowers that it's starting to put out. So this is obviously a happy plant. And I've got this smaller one here that I recently chopped up because it was getting a bit leggy and repotted it. Got a video on how I did that. I'll link to that in the description. So Echeverias obviously are succulents. Succulents need lots of direct sunlight for them to grow to their full potential. They don't like to be put in a dark position. If I was to put this guy in a darker position, it would struggle to put out its flowers during late winter, early spring. So as with all succulents, they have these thick leaves where they store the water. So that means that they don't need much watering. So the soil can dry out, so that means they can tolerate being put on a south-facing windowsill, for example, where they get lots of direct light. So I don't have a south-facing window in my house. My house faces either east or west. So I keep these guys on my west-facing windowsill to make sure that it gets a good 6 hours of direct afternoon sun, and they're responding very well. The fourth plant on my list is the Sansevieria, or the snake plant. So I've got 2 examples here. I've got this one here, which is kind of your basic model, I guess. And then you've got this variegated version here. Both really interesting plants, I like them. They come from Southern Africa, so they're used to being in very hot conditions, direct sun with dry soil. And this is what these like. We need to mimic that in our house environment. So these guys don't need much watering. And if you put them in a south-facing windowsill, they'll do just fine. They're not a fussy plant at all, really, because they'll do well in a highlight, full sun position in your house, but they'll also do well in low light conditions. So this plant did feature in my video on which plants are suitable for lower light conditions, because more or less with this plant, if you put it anywhere in your house, it will tend to do fine. So it's a good option for a position that gets lots of direct sun. So the fifth plant on my list is the Ficus Elastica Tineke. So I really like this plant. This is a variegated form of the rubber tree, just the plain green rubber tree, which is a nice plant in itself. This has like a watercolor effect on the leaves. So it's variegated, so that means for it to grow to its full potential, for it to push out new growth during the year, lots of new leaves, it needs to be put in a bright location. So I locate this right next to my east-facing windowsill, so it gets about 6 hours of direct sunlight, and it's doing just fine. It's pushing out this new growth. It's just spring is around the corner at the moment. It's already starting to push out new growth. This is the newest leaf at the top. You can tell because it's slightly pink. And yeah, so this plant will do really well in a safe south-facing position. Probably don't want to put it there for the whole day. You do want it to give it some dappled shade, maybe at some stage of the day, because there is the risk that you might start to burn some of the leaves. It might go a little bit crispy. But this plant doesn't like to have wet feet, likes dry soil, so that makes it good in a full sun position because you're not having to constantly water it. It can survive in that kind of situation where it's got drier soil basically. So really nice plant, really good for if you've got a south-facing position that you're not sure whether to put plants there. This guy will do very well. The sixth plant on my list is the Peperomia obtusifolia. So as with most peperomias, I believe, they like sunny conditions. So peperomias hail from the Mediterranean, where obviously they have dry soil and lots of sunny days during the summer. This plant will do well on a windowsill, on your west, east or south facing windowsill. They've got thick leaves, so they store lots of water in the leaves, so they like a drier soil. Obviously this one is a variegated version, so naturally they're dark green, but this guy is variegated where it's got dark green in the middle and paler, lighter green on the edges. So the lighter the plant, the lighter the leaves on the plant, the more light it requires basically. So this guy being variegated and with the thick leaves, not requiring too much water, will do very well on a south-facing position. This guy, because it lives in the Mediterranean naturally, will like being in a sunny spot. The seventh plant on my list is the String of Hearts, which is this guy here. So if you can see that. This is, would you believe it, a type of succulent. So it doesn't like having too much water in the soil. For it to grow full, which isn't really what this guy is at the moment, unfortunately. For it to grow full and lots of stems and lots of leaves on the stems, then it requires lots of light. So this guy will do very well just hanging off of a south-facing window, and it will do really well there. As long as you rotate it, it should start to develop lots of stems around the plant that it will drop, and it will develop lots of leaves on each of the stems. You'll know when the plant's not getting enough light because the gap in between each of the leaves on each of the stems will be long as it searches for the light. So I think that's what's happening with this guy. I have it in my west-facing living room. I have it above my TV, which is maybe a little bit too dark for it, and it's a little bit slow pushing out new growth. So I probably will look to move this to a new location in a brighter spot. But a succulent, so it will tolerate a few hours of direct sun. So a good option to have on near a south-facing window. The eighth plant on my list is a very popular plant, the Jade Plant, which is this guy here. I've got a care video for this plant, I'll link to that in the description. But the Jade Plant is another type of succulent, and this guy really needs to be put in a sunny position in your house. Give it as much direct sun as possible and it will respond by pushing out lots of new growth. If you have it further away from a brighter location in your house, a bit of a darker spot, and you might notice that the gaps in between the leaf nodes on the stems will be a bit elongated as it's searching for the light. So if you have it in a sunny spot in your house, then those gaps are going to be much smaller. It's going to push out lots of new growth. For this guy I have on my east-facing windowsill, and it's pushing out new growth at the moment. It's just spring is around the corner here, and it's pushing out new growth on each of these stems. The gap on between each of these leaf nodes doesn't look too bad. It looks quite good as it's growing out. I think it's quite happy there. It's a type of succulent, thick leaves, so that's where it stores the water. Doesn't like to have wet feet, and it really likes to have as much sun as possible. So put it on a south-facing windowsill and it will do just fine. And the final plant on my list is the citrus tree. So obviously citrus comes from the Mediterranean. Obviously in their natural habitat, they get lots and lots of direct sun during the day, during the spring, summer and autumn. So we need to mimic this as much as possible in our homes. So if you keep your citrus tree inside your house, if you live in a flat or you don't have a big garden for your citrus tree, you keep it inside, then you really want to put it in a position where it gets as much direct sun as possible. Otherwise, it's probably going to put out the fruit, but if you're not giving it enough direct sun, then it's not going to ripen. So obviously there's lots of citrus trees. I've got a lemon tree that I put outside during the summer to give it as much sun as possible, and I keep it indoors in the winter. Not really sure which is best for a citrus tree in the winter. It doesn't seem to like it outside because it's too cold, and it doesn't like it inside because it's not got enough humidity. So there's lots of citrus trees. You would have seen the calamondin small orange tree in your big box stores. If you've been to one of those recently, they're very popular. Put it in a position where it gets as much direct sun as possible, and it should be a happy plant. So that's my list of sun-loving plants that you should consider for a south-facing position in your house. Let me know in the comments of any other sun-loving plants that you can think of or that you have in your house that I've not mentioned here today. If you have any questions about any of the plants that I have here, about their position in the house, then please do leave it in the comments. I'll respond to those. If you found this video useful, then please give it a thumbs up. Really helps the channel grow. Subscribe to the channel if you're new. For your next video, then why not check out that one there, and I will see you there.